Pero antes me gustaría hacer una referencia a
Before we move on, I would like to make reference to the institution of the Depositum Confessatum. The three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity and Islam, condemned interest-bearing loans. It was a grave sin to lend at interest, unless one was lending to the Gentiles. Then it was not a sin. If you were Jewish and made a loan to another Jew, you were committing a sin. But if you lent to a Christian or a Muslim, you were not. It is not surprising that as a result, in the Christian world, for very prolonged periods of time, the main bankers were Jewish. That's their own business. Let them make loans. They're going to hell anyway. They're going to be condemned for having killed Jesus Christ. So what difference does it make if they lend at interest? This also largely explains the hatred of Jews. One of the easiest ways to get out of paying debts was to regularly bring about a pogrom, a persecution or a massacre of Jews. Because if the Jews died, then all debts were cancelled. But a market economy cannot function without loans and without financial intermediaries. Of course, in the 19th century, usury, lending at interest, officially ceased to be prohibited. In any case, it was necessary to look for ways to avoid the terrible penalties which, both in the temporal and in the spiritual realm, resulted from participation in lending operations. One way to conceal a loan was to disguise it as a deposit, and that is the institution of the Depositum Confessatum. As we saw, in Roman law, when the depositary of a true deposit failed to return the money properly and on time, not only was he guilty of theft, but he was also obliged to return the money with interest. And here lies the crux of the matter. In the Middle Ages, many traders thought of declaring that the interest-bearing loan they were participating in, the actual operation, was not really a loan, but a deposit. So they would reach an agreement and conspire together. The depositor would say, "Listen, I'm going to ask you to return the pseudo-deposit, which is not really a deposit but a loan, in a year. Say that you cannot return it, and then you will be sentenced to pay interest as if you were a defaulting depositary. And in that way, we will conceal the lending operation, and neither of us will be put in jail, nor will we go to hell." So then they would carry out the operation and declare or confess under oath that it was a deposit, Depositum Confessatum, when it was actually a loan. That was one of the subterfuges. There were others, which for centuries and centuries, while interest-bearing loans were prohibited, people used to conceal a loan. And I mention this institution, the Depositum Confessatum, because it had a very harmful effect on banking theory, in the sense that it completely blurred the major differences Roman law had established between the deposit and the loan. Since, in practice, loans were disguised as deposits, it became commonplace to think all deposits were loans, and even moralists, etc., were suspicious of deposits. They would say, "No, this is most likely a loan." In the end, complete confusion arose. To a great extent, that confusion, which can be traced back to the Depositum Confessatum, and which is a consequence or a historical accident of the canonical ban on usury, is largely responsible for the financial turmoil in which we now find ourselves.